When we look at the needs of startups, it's very different from any other segment of the market. In this video, we are going to discuss the ERP systems that are going to be most relevant for startups. Let's dive in. Hello everyone, my name is Sam Gupta. I am principal at Elevate IQ. Elevate IQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. We help our clients when they undertake any ERP or digital transformation journey with planning, strategy, as well as implementation. So let's get back to today's topic, which is going to be the top 10 ERP systems for startups in 2023. Before we look at the list, let's first understand how we define the startups and what criteria do we use to compile this list. So number one, the startups are going to be the companies that are going to be roughly $5 million or less in revenue, and they are probably going to have roughly 5 to 10 employees. The founder is probably going to be leading most of the functions, and for the most part there is going to be just one or maybe two employees per function. So the majority of the processes that the company is going to have is driven by these one or two individual. So they don't really have as big problems as some of the larger companies, because once you are going to have a group making decisions for the processes, then it's going to be a very different ERP implementation. And that's why this particular segment is different. The other consideration that we use for this criteria is going to be their implementation budget is going to be very low as well. And typically it is going to be in the range of roughly less than $30,000, and more than that they can probably not afford. And the ERP systems that are going to be part of this list, we make sure that those ERP systems can be implemented in that budget, and for the most part they are probably going to be implemented in the DIY or self-serve mode, and that's why this category is very different. What other considerations do we include while compiling this list? So we are going to look at the market share of these products, whether they are doing well in the startup segments. Then we look at the quality of code, the documentation, the ecosystem, the user reviews. So we include many different factors to compile this list. So now let's look at the list. Number 10 on our list is SysPro for this year. Last year we had Sage Intact at number 10. So there's a little bit of change. So what are the strengths of SysPro? Number one, SysPro is the single entity product designed for small manufacturers and distributor organizations. The benefit with SysPro is going to be it has both discrete as well as your process manufacturing functionality. It does really well with the smaller food distributors as well as manufacturers, because their needs are going to be very different overall from the ERP perspective. The comparable for SysPro is Macola, SAP Business One. Those are probably fairly similar products in terms of size. The other advantage with SysPro is it has very rich ERP functionality, and if you care for financial traceability, and that is probably going to be really relevant in the food and beverage space when you are going to be complying with HACCP, and you have to report to the financial as well as regulatory authorities, and the CFO perspective is going to be really handy from the product perspective. So SysPro has very similar perspective as your SAP or Sage, and it's going to be loved by your CFOs. So the other strength for SysPro is going to be the unit of measure support that you are going to see with SysPro is going to be extremely deep. That might not be available with some of the other products that are not really designed from the distribution perspective. And the support for one-to-one scenario is going to be equally deep as well. Some of the smaller products don't really have that, but that also makes it very difficult for the startups, because that's where you need to have expertise in the data translation. You need to understand how to restructure the master data to be successful with the implementation. And that's why Cispro ranks a little lower on this list, especially for the startups, because of the complexity of the data structure. Now, the weaknesses for Cispro is going to be the UI is still very legacy, even though they have re-architected this for cloud native experience, but the UI is not going to be as modern as some of the other cloud native products that we have on this list. The other weaknesses for Cispro is going to be the ecosystem is probably not going to be as strong. Having said that, Cispro is still a very strong product for startups, and that's why it ranks at number 10 on our list. Now, number 9 on our list is NetSuite. In 2022, we had Cispro at number 9, so a little bit of change there. NetSuite is cloud native product that targets small to medium size organizations. The strength of NetSuite is the global accounting functionality that it has. And NetSuite has accounting coverage for roughly more than 100 countries. And in the cloud native product, sometimes that is going to be harder to find. And that's why NetSuite is very ahead and does really well in the patches where the accounting and the finance functionality is going to be super relevant. So NetSuite does really well in the commerce space. It also does very well in the service space because they are probably not going to care for as much operational functionality, or they are probably going to be integrating it with some of the other operational tools. But when you look at the B2B segments or the manufacturing segments, that's where the data model of NetSuite is not going to be as friendly. Now, some of the other strengths for NetSuite is the initial pricing may be friendlier for the smaller retailers and distributors, but in general, NetSuite is a very complex product. So there might be challenges with respect to the implementation. And that's why we hear a lot of failures, especially when you think about the suite success methodology and the professional services of NetSuite. That's where we see a lot of challenges. The pre-baked integrations that you are going to find, especially in conjunction with Celigo iPaaS, they have done a wonderful job in creating a lot of pre-baked integration. In that, you don't have to spend as much money and time in fixing these integrations. So that's a strength for NetSuite. And the ecosystem is humongous as well. Whether marketplaces or consulting companies, those two are going to be super prevalent in the NetSuite ecosystem. The weaknesses for NetSuite, it's probably overly complex for startups, as I mentioned, and the B2B capabilities are probably going to be super weak, and it could be expensive. Initially, they might give you the deal, but you need to understand what your cost is going to be in the future years. And NetSuite is one of the most expensive products overall in the smaller to medium size categories. Having said that, NetSuite is still a very strong product, and that's why it ranks at number 9 on our list. Now, number 8 on our list is Acumatica. And in 2022, we had NetSuite at number 8. So again, there is a little bit of change there. Acumatica is a very similar product as NetSuite. It was born in the cloud, and Acumatica has some of the other advantages. For example, consumption-based pricing. Sometimes that could be friendlier for companies that might not have as many transactions, but they might have a lot more users, and that's where Acumatica could be really cheaper. So in certain patches, Acumatica does really well. Overall, from the data model perspective, Acumatica is really designed for that B2B as well as manufacturing experience, even though the manufacturing operational functionality is not going to be as rich as some of the other products that we have on the list. Acumatica probably suffers with the similar problem as NetSuite or any other complex products, especially in the startup category where they are not going to have as much budget. Acumatica is probably going to be slightly more complex to implement, and the reason for that is because of the hierarchy as well as the data model that Acumatica has. It requires consulting help to be successful with the product. So that's why Acumatica does not rank as high on the startup list. Now, the other strength for Acumatica is going to be the cloud nativeness, the consumption-based pricing that I already mentioned, as well as the B2B friendly data. The weaknesses for Acumatica is going to be that it's probably going to require consulting help, as I mentioned, and then it's probably going to require a little bit of budget for the integrations as well. But since it is going to have a lot of add-ons, sometimes that could require maintenance dollars in the future years, even though vendors might claim that the implementation could be $30,000, $40,000. But overall, when you have these add-ons as well as integrations, you definitely need to keep some budget for the maintenance in future. So that could be a technical as well as financial risk for companies. Now, Acumatica, the biggest problem with Acumatica, especially when you look at these commerce patches, the B2C functionality is going to be really lean in Acumatica. It's not really designed for that. And B2C segment is changing a little bit because traditionally in the B2C, in the retail segment, you never sort of touched ERP from the transaction perspective. But when you look at the omni-channel transaction model as well as the operational model, now there is need for keeping the retail as well as B2C consumers inside either ERP or OMS. In either case, the B2C functionality is probably going to be required, but Acumatica is probably going to struggle there. Having said that, Acumatica is still a very strong product for startups, and that's why it ranks at number 8 on our list. Now, number 7 on our list is ERP Next. In 2022, we had Acumatica, so we have revisited the list. Now, ERP Next is a very interesting product. It is part of that open source category, and ERP Next is really targeted for manufacturers, distributors from the data model perspective, and these are going to be smaller manufacturers as well as distributors. The reason why ERP Next is a little higher than your NetSuite Acumatica is because the data model is going to be simpler, as well as you are going to get far more affordable consulting help in the ERP Next space that you are probably not going to find with some of the other commercial products. So the strength for ERP Next is going to be simpler data model, open source, as well as ecosystem, because you are going to have a lot more developers. But keep in mind, these developers are not really the business consultants, the functional consultants. You get results from ERP when you are going to have business consultants as well as the functional consultants. Typically, technical consultants are taking orders from you. They don't really know how to restructure the master data, how to redesign your processes. So that's where the challenge is going to be with ERP Next community. Now, the weaknesses for ERP Next is, even though it might be open source, you still have to pay for hosting fee. And once you compute the ROI as well as TCO of these products, it might be similar to some of the other commercial products. So open source is really a marketing hype as such. But again, do your numbers and figure out what is going to be the most economical path for you. Now, the other weaknesses for ERP Next is going to be it requires IT expertise, and ecosystem might not be as big as Odoo or Zoho, which has slightly bigger ecosystem in general. Having said that, ERP Next is still a very strong product, and that's why it ranks at number 7 on our list. Now, number 6 on our list is ECI Macola. In 2022, we had ERP Next. So we have revised the list a little bit. ECI Macola targets similar verticals as your Syspro or SAP Business One, which is going to be smaller distributors or the light manufacturing organization. But these are going to be very MRP heavy organizations. In general, ECI Macola has very strong MRP functionality, especially when you look at the FMCG distributors. The strength for ECI Macola is going to be the data model is going to be very similar to your Syspro SAP Business One, and the data model is also going to be very friendly for FMCG distributors with some of the features. For example, let's say if you talk about food family, planning based on family, those are going to be the feature sets that are going to be really relevant for the FMCG distributors. And ECI Macola also has one-to-n scenario functionality, which might not be available in other products. Now, the weaknesses for ECI Macola is going to be its ecosystem is not as strong. The integrations are probably not going to be as strong either as you are going to find with NetSuite Acumatica, and would require consulting help to be able to implement. Now, the other challenges with products such as ECI Macola, especially if they have grown from the legacy world, they are probably not going to have the modern functionality, for example, CRM functionality. Okay, so they might claim that they have CRM functionality, but when you look at how their CRM functionality is going to work, for example, with ECI Macola, we have seen instances, typically with the modern ERP, what you are going to have is when you are going to convert your lead to your opportunity to your code to your order, all of those objects are going to be there in your ERP database, and you are not going to lose the traceability when you are going to convert from your lead to your opportunity to your code. But in some of the legacy products such as ECI Macola, you might lose either code or opportunity. So pay attention to how the system is designed to work. And these are some of the challenges that you're going to face, especially with legacy products or the smaller products. Having said that, ECI Makula is still a very strong product, and that's why it ranks at number 6 on our list. Now, number 5 on our list is Sage Intacct. In 2022, we had ECI Macola. Sage Intacct is a very accounting-centric product. It does not have as deep operational functionality compared to some of the other products on this list. The advantage with Sage Intacct is going to be it's designed for those multi-entity features and the companies that are going to require the consolidation functionality. And some of these industries are going to be, for example, energy, utility, the project-centric organizations. That's where Sage Intacct does really, really well. The strength for Sage Intacct is going to be it's cloud native. It's an easy product with deep accounting capabilities. It's going to have multi-entity capabilities. That is not going to be as natural with some of the other products. Then the weaknesses for Sage Intacct is going to be the entity-based pricing and the limited operational ERP capabilities. You would probably require a lot of add-ons with Sage Intacct and would require consulting help just because of the complex data model. Having said that, Sage Intacct is still a very strong product, and that's why it ranks at number 5 on our list for startups. Number 4 on our list is going to be ECI Job Boss 2. In 2022 as well, we had ECI Job Boss 2. There are no changes as such. ECI Job Boss 2 is designed for smaller job shops, and it's a product that is a combination of your Job Boss product, and that was very lean, simple products for startups. And then you had the E2 Shop Tech, so they have combined the best of these two products, and they have created ECI Job Boss 2, which is going to be extremely easy for smaller job shops. Now, the strength is the simplicity is where it really shines. The last mile capabilities for job shops is also a strength, but it is not going to have as deep capabilities that you could find in the on-prem or the desktop world. For example, let's say if you talk about ECI M1, ProShop, those are probably going to have far deeper last mile functionality than this product. But overall, from the data model perspective, data structure perspective, this is a very strong product, and you are probably not going to find as many challenges when you are going to outgrow some of the other legacy products. The biggest plus with ECI Job Boss 2 is going to be it can be implemented in the DIY mode. The weaknesses for ECI Job Boss 2 is going to be that it's not a fit for diverse startups. For example, let's say if you're doing manufacturing, field service, construction, then it could be very challenging because the only thing Job Boss 2 has is your job shop functionality, and the ecosystem and integrations are not going to be as prevalent as some of the other products. So those could be some of the challenges. Having said that, ECI Job Boss 2 is a very strong product for startups, and that's why it ranks at number 4 on our list. Now, number 3 on our list is ECI DCOM. Last year, we had ECI DCOM as well, so there are no changes as such. ECI DCOM is also a very simple product, just like your ECI Job Boss 2. It's not going to have all those complicated one-to-one scenarios, and it's not going to have as many layers of data hierarchy from the pricing and discounting perspective, but that's okay because your processes are going to be simpler, and this is probably going to be better than QuickBooks. But again, these systems are not necessarily the real ERP when you get into the real planning cycles. If you are serious about improvising your operational efficiency planning, that's where you are probably going to require slightly stronger ERPs. But in the beginning stage, that's okay because you don't have as many people, your startup is not as big. So the strength for ECI DCOM is going to be it's cloud native. The UI is really good and comparable to some of the other cloud native products. It is really ideal for process manufacturing, the pharma-centric startups. You are going to get a lot more last mile functionality that you are not going to find with some of the other products. It can be implemented in the DIY mode. That's also a plus. Now, the weakness for ECI DCOM, it's going to have the limited one-to-one capabilities that you are going to find with Acumatica and NetSuite. The ecosystem is not going to be as large as Odoo, so you might have challenges in finding the consultants. You have to rely on the OEM, and if you have anything outside of OEM's coverage, then you might struggle there. Then it's also going to be weak in discrete manufacturing capabilities. So having said that, ECI DCOM is still a very strong product, and that's why it ranks at number 3 on our list. on our list is Zoho. In 2022 as well, we had Zoho. When you look at the Zoho product, a lot of people will claim that Zoho is probably an ERP. But the way Zoho is designed, it's really the collection of apps. It has very similar architecture as Odoo. Sure, the integration is going to be there, but the embeddedness that your ERP is going to have, that is not possible when you are going to have these individual apps. Sure, you can get a lot of ERP capabilities, but the integration is really not going to be as tight that you typically get with the ERP products. But when you are going to be small startup, then it's probably going to be okay. But overall, Zoho is a very accounting payroll centric product. Sure, it is going to have some ERP functionality as well, but it's not really as strong. Now, the strength for Zoho is going to be it's really easy product. Just because of that tight integration as well as data model, you can probably implement this in DIY mode with some help from Zoho. You probably don't require as much consulting help, and that's why it is really positioned very high for startups. Now, Zoho's sweet spot is going to be those service-centric startups. It's not really designed for product-centric startups. For example, if you talk about any of the manufacturing or distribution, Zoho can do really well when you really need the accounting functionality and the operations are probably going to run on spreadsheets. The integration with Zoho, HCM, as well as payroll is going to be pretty big, but check with them if they are going to have the same coverage for every single state. In the US, Zoho is an Indian company, so they have very strong capabilities for India, but they might not have as strong capabilities for Canada or the US, especially with their HCM product, at least as of today. The weaknesses for Zoho is going to be one-to-one capabilities, not really an ERP system, and it's really a collection of apps. Having said that, Zoho is still a very strong product, and that's why it ranks at number 2 on our list. Now, number 1 on our list is Odoo. In 2022 as well, we had Odoo. Odoo is a very similar product as Zoho. It's probably going to be slightly deeply integrated as compared to some of the other accounting or the CRM products, but the business model is very similar with Odoo as well. Odoo does really well with, let's say, the e-commerce startups, the restaurants, the industry 4.0 verticals, just because they have a lot of last mile functionality for the franchise branch centric businesses that you are not going to find with the other products. Now, the strength with Odoo is going to be it is open source, so you might not be paying as much for the licensing, but the every app that Odoo has is probably not going to be open source. And if you are going to be looking at their SaaS model, that is probably going to have the similar price point, but obviously it's not going to be as expensive as NetSuite. So Odoo is probably going to be cheaper overall from the licensing perspective, but then it is probably not going to have as deep operational capabilities as some of the other ERP products on this list, but that's okay for these startups because you don't need as deep operational functionality. The strength for Odoo is going to be the data model is easy, and that's what makes it more relevant for these startups because you can implement this in DIY mode. The open source is the another strength, and the third is ecosystem as well as globalization. Similar to NetSuite, it is globalized in more than 50 countries, I guess. And that's what makes it very relevant for companies that might be operating in multiple countries, especially if you are going to be a smaller startup and operating in multiple countries and don't really have a budget. That's where Odoo can be really handy for you, especially in geographies such as Europe and South America, because that's where you are going to be probably present in multiple countries. The weaknesses for Odoo is going to be not a fit for large companies and a tendency to over customize and the over promotion by the Odoo itself. That could be a challenge for the companies, and that's why we see a lot more failures with Odoo. And you are probably going to require a little bit of IT expertise, the way the product is designed, the way it is commercialized. Having said that, Odoo is still a very strong product for startups in 2023, and that's why it ranks at number 1 on our list. Now, if you enjoyed this list, we are going to include the link of the article that is going to have very detailed analysis of this list. So you might want to check that out, as well as we have this podcast available in the audio version. If you prefer that, head over to Apple, Spotify, and Google, and you might want to subscribe that. If you enjoyed this video, we publish them on a weekly basis, and if you don't want to miss them, hit the subscribe button on YouTube. as well as if you have not checked our digital transformation report for 2023, we are going to include the link of that as well. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one.